Hello, and this is going to complete Unit 5, which is cell energy. And this is the section where we're going to talk about the two types of cellular respiration, or the two types we can actually take glucose molecules made in the photosynthetic process that green plants, with the help of chlorophyll in the sun, as well as carbon dioxide and water, turn into glucose, and then how all cells take glucose and turn them into ATP, the energy for cells. So, aerobic exercise, I actually ask the kids this, and they tell me this is exercise where you breathe, and you breathe faster, and your heart pumps, and you actually use oxygen in the process of cellular respiration to actually break that glucose or pyruvate into a whole boatload of ATP. And then anaerobic, they sort of work out as the opposite of what that is, so we're not really breathing. So this is cellular respiration. And aerobic exercise is when you use oxygen, and if your mitochondria are working at tip-top shape, you can make up to 38 ATPs using one glucose molecule. But you do have to have a mitochondria or mitochondrion inside your cell. And remember, this is a double membraned with cristae and that matrix in the middle. Matrix doing Krebs cycle. Actually, let me go through here. Oxygen, glycolysis happening out in the cytosol out here, and this happens with or without oxygen. This can make 2 ATPs, and that's what these guys are doing down here. Krebs cycle, which we do in the matrix, is we can take the pyruvate, which glucose creates, along with the 2 ATPs, and some energy electron carriers. We put it into the matrix, and we can pump it up to 4 more ATPs, and then we take those more electron carriers from the glycolysis out here, the breaking of glucose, and we move it into the intramembrane in between, where the cristae is actually increasing surface area, and we pump it back and forth in and out of the mitochondria. We can change those electrons, high energy electrons, into a boatload of ATPs, 32 more. So aerobic exercise using 38 ATPs, we get 2 with oxygen glycolysis, we get 4 more from the Krebs cycle in the matrix, and we get 32 more if we go into the intracellular space, for a grand total of up to 38. Anaerobic occurs without oxygen, so that cuts off the Krebs cycle, it cuts off electron transfer, and basically what happens is no oxygen, you only get 2 ATPs. And this is yeast. This is yeast actually being prepared for not exactly sure what, but you give flour, sugar, open it to the environment, you'll get all kinds of really cool stuff growing. Or of course you can go to the grocery store and get dry yeast and put it in there along with sugar and flour, and come up with this really disgusting looking material, which you can make bread and all kinds of yummy things. So in the cytosol, which all life has, you can take glucose, and regardless of whether or not you have oxygen or not, you can break that into, with glycolysis, break it into 2 pyruvates. This can make 2 ATPs. The pyruvate can't enter mitochondria because you don't have it, like this yeast. So what we get is we get what's called fermentation, and we can have 2 different types of fermentation. First type we're going to talk about is lactic acid fermentation, and this is something that animals can use. And this is an aerobic cellular respiration that is performed by animals when there's not enough oxygen. If you look at this female, this girl, this lady, she probably just ran a long race. She looks like she's completely beat, and probably what happened is her muscles were working so hard and so long that she couldn't breathe fast enough, which means they couldn't go through the Krebs cycle, they couldn't go through electron transfer, they couldn't make the big net ATP production. So what happened is her muscles clicked into lactic acid fermentation, or production of lactic acid, and with that she got 2 ATPs. And what basically happens is the glucose, there's no oxygen to put it into the mitochondria, so what happens is it goes straight into a chemical called lactate, or lactic acid. And what that's supposed to do is go into the blood, find its way to the liver, and that goes through a process of making glucose again, which can go back to the blood, and then when times are plenty with oxygen, you can go through the whole process of cellular respiration with all 3 of those, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transfer. But if you can't breathe fast enough, this lactic acid builds up in the muscle, and what it does, it causes sore muscle and cramps. Here's a quick diagram of what a cramp actually is. Normal muscle structure, okay, the cuff calf muscle, when it contracts, it actually tightens up, and that pulls your heel up. And then what's supposed to happen is the muscle in the front pulls the heel, or pulls the front of the foot up and the heel down. But what a cramp is when this muscle, and you can see this is the relaxed state, the muscle doesn't contract. So what happens is you get a knot in the back of your leg, and it hurts. You're stretching it out, and it hurts. So what you do is you try to stretch this out by pulling your toes up as fast as you can, or as far as you can, and that stretches the back of your leg, which hopefully you can get it back to this location. But I know some of you probably experience the same thing. When you finally get your foot back to normal, this thing tightens up again and wants to pull your foot back up, and it just hurts and hurts and hurts. Second type of fermentation is called alcoholic fermentation. This is also anaerobic. It also produces 2 ATPs, performed by yeast, which actually makes bread rise, can make cheese, can make wine, can make beer, can turn apple into wine, can turn apple into ale. You can turn almost any kind of fruit, any kind of grain into something, but what it also does is produces alcohol. Now, alcohol is a byproduct. It actually ends up being a poison. If you want to make wine, and you want to try to make wine 90 proof or 45% alcohol, what happens is that alcohol, when it gets above, I want to say 8 to 9%, what happens is the yeast actually gets poisoned by the alcohol, and it kills the yeast, which stops the whole alcohol fermentation process. This allows you to make bread, makes nice little bubbles in here. My son made some sourdough this over Thanksgiving break. This is the week after Thanksgiving break, and he made sourdough dough with no bubbles whatsoever. It ended up looking like concrete or cake. You can take wine, you can crush it, and if you actually have red wine, it goes straight into the fermentation process. If you have white wine, you have to do some things like settle it out and clarify it and do other things. But eventually you put it into big wooden kegs to cure, and then eventually that can go into bottles and you can sell it into stores. So you're actually using yeast in this fermenter to make a certain alcohol content. If you want sweet wine, you add sugar to it, and you don't let the complete sugar fermentation process with the yeast go through all the sugar, or you can probably add sugar later on after the yeast has been taken out. Here's an example where we take that glucose and we make it into pyruvate, and if we take different kinds of bacterium or different kinds of yeast and things, we can come up with different types of alcoholic fermentation or lactic acid fermentation and come out with cheeses of different types, yogurts, soy sauce, wine, beer, nail polish, rubbing alcohol, and vinegar of all types of flavors, all with fermentation products using different organisms, taking glucose and making pyruvate, not having mitochondria to take it any farther. So these are all byproducts of alcoholic fermentation. Aerobic versus anaerobic cellular respiration. It does take the glucose from your cytoplasm, cytosol. It takes the pyruvates in and goes through a process of glycolysis, breaking it into pyruvate, and that makes 2 ATPs, regardless of whether you have an anaerobic without oxygen or an aerobic with oxygen, whether you have mitochondria or not. You do have two different types of fermentation. Both are going to use glycolysis. Sorry about that. They're both going to use glycolysis. This produces lactic acid and alcohol fermentation. This one, going with presence of oxygen, anaerobic, can actually use the 2 ATPs from glycolysis, put 4 more in through the Krebs cycle, and put 32 more in for the electron transfer. So no oxygen, pyruvate can enter mitochondria, you end up with 2 ATPs. If you do have oxygen, you can take the pyruvate, put it into the mitochondria, and take the 2 there and the 4 there and the 32 and make up to 38 ATPs, which is a much more efficient system of making energy for cells, which is why animals and plants can do a lot more than what yeast and bacteria can do. Little bit of review, 3 slides here, where kids turned in vocabulary over the last couple days, and all 4 classes asked me about this one. Photosynthesis and cellular respirations are what are called complementary processes. And what that basically means is that if you take the products of photosynthesis and you look at cellular respiration, they end up being the reactants of cellular respiration. And then the reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration. So what that means is plants can take carbon dioxide and water and sunlight and actually make sugar, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, which animals and plants, they actually do make them for the plants, but animals can also use it, whether it's this monarch caterpillar or this monarch butterfly. They can use that to produce ATPs. The oak leaf or whatever this thing, probably milkweed, can also use the sugar and the oxygen with mitochondria to make 38 ATPs. The animals can make it, and then the plants produce carbon dioxide and water. The animals produce carbon dioxide and water, which goes back in with sunlight to make sugar and oxygen again. Photosynthesis, the equation, using stoichiometry to balance it. We need 6 carbons to make the sugar. There are the 6. We need 12 oxygens. Breaking that up, there are the 12 oxygens. We need H12. 6 times H2 is 12, plus 6 more oxygens. There they are. So we lyse the carbon dioxide to make oxygen, and then we use that carbon to make a 6-carbon sugar along with water to make that 6-carbon sugar. Reactants, carbon dioxide, water, and light. Products, glucose and oxygen. And light goes in, reactants go in, products come out. Photosynthesis, the equation is exactly the opposite. There's where the 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, and sunlight would go in. But in this case, we take the oxygen and we take the sugar from photosynthesis. We move it into, for a eukaryotic cell like our cells, we move it into a mitochondria. We use glycolysis out here. We use Krebs cycle and the electron transfer chain to actually make a boatload of ATPs, up to 38 for the total. So we take the oxygen and the glucose, we pump it in, and the products are carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which is the energy. So here's the whole thing. Light goes in, ATP comes out, and the carbon dioxide and water just change into sugar and oxygen, which gets changed back into carbon dioxide and water, which gets changed with sunlight and chlorophyll back into sugar and oxygen, which gets changed from mitochondria, whether it be the matrix for Krebs cycle or the intracellular space for using the electron transfer system. It actually makes carbon dioxide and water, and that makes sugar and oxygen, and it just keeps going back. Autotrophs make the energy, the sugar and the oxygen. Autotrophs and heterotrophs take it and make ATP. So plants do both. Animals can only do this one. Plants can only do this one. Okay, that's it. Unit 5. Appreciate you stopping by. Bye-bye.